I am so excited to have on the podcast today Kathleen deLaski, author of the thought-provoking new book, Who Needs College Anymore? Imagining a Future Where Degrees Won't Matter, which was published in February by Harvard Education Press. Kathleen spent 20 years as a journalist, including time as an ABC News White House correspondent. In the second half of her career, she has focused on education reform, co-founding or founding several national nonprofits, notably the Education Design Lab, which led her toward this book. After stepping down as president to become board chair, Kathleen also spends time as a senior advisor to the Project on Workforce at Harvard University and teaches human-centered design and higher ed reform as an adjunct professor at George Mason University. Kathleen deLaski, welcome to the Liberated Podcast.
Thank you very much. I await being liberated. This sounds great. This is going to be fun.
It's great to have you here. I really enjoyed reading your book, and I mentioned it in a recent article that I wrote at the 74 about alternatives to college and why there is growing interest
hmm
in alternative pathways to adulthood, which is a key theme of your book. And I want to get into the content that you talk about, but first, I'd love to hear what motivated you to write the book.
Well, the reasons were professional and personal. I think when you endeavor in a project like this, I'd never written a book before. So when you launch into something that's going to take up a year or so of your life, you need more motivation than, oh, this is a nice career capstone. And for me, I had been, as you mentioned, I founded the Education Design Lab in 2013. Um, and a lot of the work of the lab was to work with colleges to help them sort of disrupt themselves to create shorter term pathways to economic sustainability for people, and particularly for those we call new majority learners. That's a phrase that describes anyone for whom college was not originally designed.
Hmm.
And a lot of those people, particularly in the last 50 years, wonderfully so, have been trying to make college work for them. And it has for many, and there have been great success stories. But there are also many folks who either don't try to attempt college, lack of confidence, time poverty, financial situation. But 40 to 50%, depending on your demographic uh, situation, try college and it doesn't work out. They're sort of spit out of the gauntlet or choose to leave for various reasons. And, that is leaving, as a result, a majority of Americans on the sidelines of getting a four-year degree. And, 62% to be exact, that's how many Americans do not have a four-year degree. And so professionally, I was meeting a lot of these people in the work that I was doing over the last 12 years. And we were designing with them and for them and with the colleges that were trying to come up with new ways for the system. And the system is not really, I mean, there are plenty of innovators inside of colleges and universities and high schools, but the system fights against them as they try to come up with other ways. So that's one reason I wrote the book, was to try to demonstrate how, not very hard it would be to change the system to support people in other forms of higher education that we don't value or respect or evaluate or fund currently. And then the personal reason that I wrote the book really was because my own, as a mom, um, my own children were in the system, of going through middle school, high school, and this idea that we all aspire to go to a college, and if you live in an area like we live, you aspire to go to a really good college, and if you're not on that track, you are, kind of otherized, and you are less than. And neither of my children, it didn't work out for them, for different reasons. The middle school, high school system, didn't really support them very well. And they both struggled, and our whole family struggled, emotionally, physically, in the case of, one of my daughters, having becoming ill over the stress of it.
Hmm.
And so that kind of radicalizes you when you think about, wow, this system is not working. When you're not at the softball game talking about how your daughter's applying to UVA and maybe Vassar, right? They're just doing other things. And I actually became in my own family or my own community, um, people were, kind of coming to me because they knew that, things weren't working out at our house. And they were, coming to me to ask questions and, look for support. It almost became like an alternative, network of moms or parents, thinking about this. But like, why is it that way? Like, why can't there be multiple pathways to economic sufficiency, after school? And that, so that's where the kind of the heart for it came from. I mean, the head for the idea came from the work I was doing over a couple of decades.
I love that. Yeah, there's one part of the book where you talk about your own experience applying to and getting into Duke University, and then how later, I guess more recently, you
Yeah.
put your stats into an AI kind of college chance me generator, and it said
Yeah.
something like you don't only have about a 3% chance of getting into Duke today, and it just sort of shows the heightened pressure, particularly for young people wanting to get into highly selective universities,
Yeah.
although more generally, it's actually easier to get into college today
Hmm.
than ever before. The vast majority of colleges accept the vast majority of applicants, but again,
That's
for
right.
those top ones. So I wonder if we could talk a bit more about this college for all phenomenon that you
Yeah.
said that you were kind of caught up
Oh,
in the
yeah.
1990s. What was that about, and kind of how have you seen that change over the past few decades?
Well, I think it really started in the 80s, but it sort of crescendoed into the early 2000s. And I was working in the charter school movement in the early 2000s. And I ran Sally Mae's foundation. They were, Sally Mae was a student lender. And so, we were going around the country doing campaigns around, college is possible for everyone. And it was really trying to widen the lens of access to college because college was seen, as the best route to a good job and to a career of meaning. And and statistics were starting to bear out, right? That if you, in fact, that was when I was doing the tour for this. We did like a big bus tour for Sally Mae and going to a lot of, like low income communities because research was showing that the Pell Grants and the entitlements, particularly for low income people to help them afford college, were largely unknown to large swaths of the population. They didn't know that they qualified for these things to, in some cases, have a free ride to college. So we would go around and do these campaigns trying to like make people aware. And that was when the first charts came out that showed that if you went to college, a 4-year degree, you could make over your lifetime. At that time, it was like $1.2 million more.
Yeah.
And that was very compelling. You'd be in a high school auditorium, you throw that chart up, and people, you could hear the murmurs in the in the crowd. People were amazed by that and like, oh, and I could actually go to an inexpensive college on my Pell Grant, which at the time was probably like $6,000 a year. Um, and so that, there was a big movement to try to get more people into college.
Mm.
But what happened over time, and when I should say one of the other reasons to do that was because the prior policy had been what we called tracking, right? Which became
Yeah.
discredited because it was seen as frankly, elitist and even racist, right? Because the idea was that somewhere around, seventh or eighth or ninth grade, a determination is made, unbeknownst often to the parents or the students that, oh, this kid is college material and this kid is not. And so, I remember being in um, like ninth, 10th grade, and suddenly some of your friends would just kind of like disappear out of your classroom. And like never to be seen again. And then you would see them, our school housed my public high school housed the Votech building. And so you'd see them out back, we called it out back. And the girls would have on their beauty smocks. They were in cosmetology, and the guys would be in auto shop. and there weren't very many choices. And that's sort of how people got tracked out of a college track. And those of us who were on the college track, we didn't even do anything or ask, it just happened to us. Who knows, because you did well in a math test or something. And so that, yeah, but that became discredited by the 90s. And so everyone, everybody was supposed to be on the college track. So at least it was an option for you and you could make the choice. And that, that's great. And as it should be. But over time, what started to happen, really after the Great Recession, when people started realizing, oh, actually, my college degree maybe isn't getting me a good job, because the employment rates of new graduates started to decline. But I think more importantly, uh, there was an issue where people started to feel like they uh, either wanted to work with their hands, or the student debt piece was just student debt collectively passed the $1 trillion mark right around the recession. And so there, the sort of the bud was off the vine, or the shine was off the rose, or whatever the right metaphor is. And people started to really question, and public surveys started to demonstrate that actually, now it's like 56% of Americans say the degree isn't worth it. And that trend
Mm.
began after the Great Recession, so around 2010. So then College for All has never been nationally challenged, because you really can't challenge it, because who wouldn't feel that everybody should be able to go to college? But the data was starting to show people like me, who were in the College for All movement, that we were actually doing a disservice to people who were going and then getting spit out, because that was happening, as I said, to 40% of all students and 50% of those who are, from a demographic where they may be the first in their family to go, and they don't have the, sort of the support systems in place. And so we started to all kind of say, wait, we need more options that get you to the same destination, but don't require you to do this 4-year degree specifically. And so college enrollment's been declining over the 2010s by about 15%. And then it's starting to climb up a little bit now, like in the last 2 years. But that's really driven not by people enrolling in 4-year degrees, but by people enrolling in short-term credentials.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about sort of micro credentialing and apprenticeship programs and boot camps and all sorts of things that you talk about in the book. But I think it's important to say that this book is definitely not an anti-college book in any way, but it does sort of offer college as one pathway to a meaningful adulthood, to a fulfilling life and career. And it's interesting because in the book you talk about who does need college and who does not need college, and you sort of have four buckets for each of these groups. For who does not need college or who might not need college, you say the connected career switcher, the motivated do-it-yourselfer, the prepackaged career starter, the undecided maybe later. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more, maybe broadly, about
Mhm.
those groups and sort of who does not need college today.
Right. And you gave me the caveat, and I just want to repeat it, to drive it home, that anyone, I would recommend to any 18-year-old, give it a try if
Mhm.
you have access to the funds, or small amount of debt is okay for your family, um, and you can imagine yourself, sitting in a classroom. I would say give it a try, because at the very least, it is a great way to explore careers and build some short-term skills. And colleges are starting to think about, wow, how can we actually give credentials to people who might leave,
Mm.
before they're finished. And so, there's thinking about, oh, maybe, you can do what we're calling a micro pathway. So colleges are starting to figure this out, that not everybody, particularly in this day and age, wants to go for a whole 4 years. Um, and so I'm definitely pro give it a try if your situation allows for it. But here are the categories generally of people who maybe don't need, can afford to skip college
Mm,
are folks who might be what you might call overage. I mean, nobody's overage for college. I don't mean to suggest that, but if you're outside the traditional college going time frame,
yeah.
um, a lot of what is wonderful about the college experience like doesn't apply to you or won't be wonderful for you because you are, not wanting to live in the dorm with other freshmen. Like my own daughter, who didn't go to college, she started thinking she was in a different career that didn't require college. And as she was thinking about switching, around 26 because of COVID. She had been a ballet. She still is a ballet dancer, where you go right to apprenticeship. You don't go
Yeah.
to university because you have to start your career early because your career is so short. um, and so she's now, not now, but she was. I'm describing in the book. She was like 26, 27. COVID hits, and her whole ballet company got laid off, and um, she was like, well, do I need, should I think about going back to college? And my advice to her and her husband, who was in the same boat, um, was no. I mean, I think unless you want to be a doctor, a lawyer, there's certain careers, a minister, a physical therapist, where you absolutely have to go through the whole gauntlet, often, for 6 to 8 years. But they were both interested in careers that they could do in a more short form. So
Mm,
that's the career switcher, and there are now more opportunities beyond, being trade school to achieve those things in areas like tech, healthcare, business, entrepreneurship, obviously, many fields, and some of the creative arts. And digital arts that you where you can. And she did a boot camp in digital marketing and was able to get employment, even during the height of COVID, directly out of that boot camp. I mean, maybe that was unusual. Maybe she got lucky, but I profile other people in the book who had sort of DIY paths. So that's like one example. The person who's older and has some connections and maybe some dollars that they can afford to grab onto training options
mm.
outside of the federal, outside of the student lending and student grant, the federal financial aid system. Um, those are folks who can't afford to do that. And other categories include apprenticeships generally, and people who are just kind of DIYing it with YouTube and then doing like industry certifications. Those are good ways to kind of take a DIY approach. And I actually recommend Reddit. Like if you're looking, okay, well, who's going to be my guidance counselor? Well, Reddit is pretty true. I mean, I follow Reddit and I found people through Reddit to interview in the book. Um, it's you get really good advice on Reddit about, well, which jobs, which, how do I go about this? People are so helpful to each other. It's amazing.
That's great.
Um,
Yeah, and one of the things you talk about in the book is how more employers are um, becoming interested in these alternative pathways. They're increasingly interested in, do you have the skills to be successful in this job, rather than do you have a traditional bachelor's degree. That's something that has changed over time as well in your,
Yeah, I don't want to overstate that because I think it's early days.
yeah.
That is the intention of many re employers. They want to move in that
Mhm.
direction. But I will say that if you have a degree and you're up against somebody who doesn't have a
Mm.
degree but has an industry certification, um, they might have a better chance. But the degree does kind of give you still that it's that kind of blunt instrument security blanket that tells an employer that you know how to meet deadlines. You have shown up for class for 4 years. um, you know potentially how to collaborate with folks. You've probably gotten help on your resume, although now everyone can just use AI, so you don't even need the career services for that anymore. you might need it for other things to get internships and that sort of thing. But so I will say that somebody coming out of college is probably better situated than someone who just DIY, do it yourself their way through industry certifications. But if you don't have the funds or the time, or you're not the right age group, like to go and really get the most out of a college experience, you can with some moxie, make it work. And I profile several people in the book who did just that. And I think more and more people will be doing it, and more jobs are dropping their degree requirements because they're realizing that, they can be more discreet and specific about the skills they need. And, one of the movements that I'm passionate about is how do we get employers and employer groups to create more industry credentials that are actually more specific to job roles, because right now it's probably only about 30% of job roles have, an industry certification that you could earn to even try to get that role. And we need more of those, because then it will be really easy to create, my recommendation of what I call a stepladder approach, to that colleges should move to a stepladder approach where they are offering smaller increments of, learning and skill building that can be stacked together to a degree, but also stand alone and have earnings power, create earnings power for the individual to be able to come in and out of higher education, not just when they're young, but through their lives. Because look how things are changing. We all need to be pivoting, at least 4 or 5 times in our careers, if not more.
Right. So then you're talking about how college and the college degree can be a signaling mechanism for
Hmm.
employers, but that there may be these other avenues for employers to think about for supporting young people and career switchers and so forth. And then you also talk about the sort of four general categories of people who you think still do need college. Those are class transporters, legitimacy label seekers, degree and license workers, and longing to belongers. I wonder again if you could talk broadly about
Yeah.
this group of who does still need college.
Yeah. I think, you can't argue with the data that show that people who are trying to move from one economic class to another, to a better one, um, are not best served by uh, getting a college degree, particularly a 4-year college degree. Um, there's significant data that shows the economic mobility um, acceleration of people who, often it's immigrant families, where the parents come to this country so that their kids won't have to work as hard as they did it, and their kids can get an education. Often those kids are pressed to do very practical degrees by their parents, right? And they move from, the bottom quartile of earners to they move up not just one rank often, but two or three. And there's, great research on this by Raj Chetty. He's now out of Harvard, that demonstrates that, certain kinds of schools in particular are good at moving their students. And they tend to be like state universities that are public because they're more affordable. And like the Washington Monthly does a really good ROI,
Yeah.
return on investment, ranking of colleges, and you can see. So I certainly recommend, for a family that's looking at, should my 18-year-old go to college? Are they I mean, do they want to go through the gauntlet? I mean, they have to want to, because I interviewed a lot of students at some of these college prep high schools where the student didn't want to do it. Either the student was afraid of the debt themselves, or they just couldn't imagine themselves, really with an academic profile, even though they might have taken AP classes because their school had everybody take AP classes, or they've been told they have to apply to college for graduation, but there's still, I interviewed some that still didn't want to do it because they, either wanted to work with their hands or they want to just get on with their lives. They just didn't see themselves in college. So that the percentage of those folks is increasing. In other words, you're getting more kids, even in college prep schools, that are choosing against college. I mean, not huge numbers of that group, but some. But I would recommend to students in that profile to go for a degree, uh, um, if they can. And then the legitimacy label is something different. Someone seeking the legitimacy label of college is
Mm,
often, it's not for changing economic class. It's to basically bolster their own confidence, that um, that they believe that it will help them, having the piece of paper will help them achieve whatever their goals are, personal
mm,
or professional. And there's a lot of folks in that category. I mean, there's a reason why women take on more debt to get a degree than men do, and there's a reason why Black women take on more debt than any other group of people. And I profile one friend in the book who went all the way through to PhD, and she was the first in her family to go to college. And in her view, like, she had to have these pieces of paper um, to to be legitimate in her world. And I share my own story of how, not so much for a call, I was just kind of swept along in my middle class Virginia situation into a degree program. I didn't really think about it. But when I was thought about grad school, absolutely, for me, that was a legitimacy label, in the, early 1980s, when I was I wanted to be a foreign correspondent. And I, I was a local TV reporter in Durham, North Carolina, not a lot of credibility for, getting a job with the network. And so I said, I'm going to go to graduate school, and I'm going to try to get into Harvard, because if I have an international relations degree, master's from Harvard, then I can be a foreign correspondent, right? And I think it did help me, and, in some ways, mostly it helped with my confidence, right? And I did achieve that goal. But I don't know how much the degree helped, but it certainly helped me with connections, and confidence. So I think I was a legitimacy label. I was in that category for grad school, at least. So those are two of the categories. The license to work workers, that's really all the careers that require a degree and will for many, many years, right? Those are where the licensure bodies, medicine, law, engineering, CPAs, certified public accountants, physical therapy, clinical therapists, teachers, ministers, those jobs require degrees. I think it will change if
mm.
and when, which is happening in some of these fields, nursing, where there are shortages. And what you see happening right now, where there are shortages in teaching and nursing, for example, behavioral health, they're creating jobs that don't require any degree at the kind of bottom. They're kind of like triage roles that they're creating at the bottom of the funnel, because there's just not enough people. And then they're helping those people get up to the next level of the funnel, because not enough people are signing up for those jobs anymore.
Really interesting. One of the things that you say in the book is that it's sort of a both and, right? Fixing college and disrupting it, sort of through some of these innovative strategies, especially sort of employers and micro-credentialing. What are the ways in which colleges can reinvent themselves? How do you envision fixing college
Yeah.
to reflect today's realities?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question, because I say in the book that I subscribe to the fix and disrupt school of innovation, um, because I teach at a university. I was on the board at that same university, George Mason, and I'm very bullish on the role that universities play, both in terms of research, which I don't really talk so much in the book about, but also in terms of formation of happy, healthy, um, critical thinking adults, right? Um, so I devote a whole chapter in the book to one of the sort of fix um, movements, which I see happening, and I would say it's even reaching more of a fever pitch now than it was when I finished writing the book, which was I sort of put the pen down around last summer sometime, and this just in this last 6 to 8 months, wow, this topic, and the topic is um, how much of a role should colleges expect themselves to play in delivering their graduates at the door of their first job? So what is the obligation or role, or how can they present a value proposition that's like, we're going to help you get hired? um, and it hasn't, colleges have not seen that as their role. um, Understandably, we're educating you up here, and then we have a career services office that you can avail yourselves of. We'll help you get internships, but the rest is up to you. And more and more graduates are feeling like they're not getting hired, and one of the reasons to blame, that they do blame, right, is this disconnect between what I learned in college and what I would, and the job postings that I, then go look for. I don't see the things I can say I can do on the job postings. This happened to my other daughter, who did go to college, neuroscience major, finishes her degree, goes to look at, Indeed and the job market, and doesn't see a single job that is going to hire a neuroscience major. Like, there's nothing that she did that shows up on any job description, because you're expected to go to graduate school and then get a PhD if you want to be a neuroscientist, right? But no one had told her that, and I didn't know the field, so I wasn't very helpful. So she went to work in a bike shop for like, a year or two, and then developed some other skills unrelated to her degree, like she didn't need to go to college for. So, and this is happening more and more. I mean, the latest statistics, there's, just something going around right now on LinkedIn, from an Atlantic article that got published, that shows that the unemployment rate for new college grads is higher than the general unemployment rate, right? Well, this is alarming, and I think colleges are alarmed by this. And then you put AI on top of it, which is, we're all worried that AI is going to take away some substantial number of entry-level white-collar jobs.
Mm.
That's going to be terrible for, new college grads, right? So what's a college's responsibility in this area, and should it change?
Yeah.
And I believe it should. And I actually devoted the last semester, just this past fall, my class, we did an 8-week design session on this very topic of like, what could we do? But so in the book, I profile five colleges that kind of demonstrate different models of how colleges are approaching the sort of the, how do we better prepare people to actually, be hired. So I won't go through all the models, but they range from helping them see the skills, to see the translation of skills, which was Western Governors University's model, all the way up to um, a, a program that probably many of your listeners know about, Northeastern University, which has the co-op program, where every single student, undergrad and grad, does at least one, and usually two, um, 6 months apprenticeships, or internships, depending on the situation, where they actually disenroll from college, go to their job, and then come back, and they do that twice. And it's wildly successful. I interviewed one student who became a broadcast journalist, using his internships to build his experience. And they have like job placement rates in the 90s. And they're now a highly selective college, because you can't get every parent wants their kid to go there because you come out employed.
Yeah, they had something like over 100,000 applications this
Isn't that
past
crazy?
admission cycle because of that. Yeah, the perceived return on investment in terms of a job. Yeah. You
And I
also
think a
talk,
lot of
sorry. No, go
colleges are
ahead.
waking. I was just going to say, I think a lot of colleges are looking at, it's very hard to do what they're doing. They've been doing it since inception 100 years ago, and they have like 200 plus um, um, like advisors who actually are, they engage with employers to find, the hard part is landing the internships for the students, right? And so you have to invest in that. And a lot of colleges don't have a budget line for that. I get it. But I also interview or profile several other models in between.
Yeah. So you talk about reinventing college. You also talk about reinventing high school, and
Hmm.
you have some discussions there for what high schools can do. I wonder if you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah, well, with high schools, I know as I was in the sort of high school redesign field for a little while, I know how hard it is to change, particularly public high schools. Um, but there it's and I point to the Maryland blueprint that they're trying to do, which is this idea that the last 2 years of high school become more of them become devoted to the students stepping out into their community and engaging in apprenticeship, internship, or community service. That there's more like self exploration, like who am I, what do I want to do, and let me test some things out. That's part of the goal of late high school, because one thing that kind of points towards maybe a mandate for us to do this is if you look at how many students are now doing dual enrollment, how many high school students are signing up for college classes. It's in the millions. And in fact, one out of every five community college students today is actually a high school student who's taking a class or two. And so there's obviously a hunger because they're being allowed to do this in high school. There's obviously a hunger to like let's call it blend the silos or merge them in some way. Like how could there be more of a connect between what you're doing in high school, what you're doing in college, or what you're going to be doing professionally. I also profile New York City, which is doing a really cool program with some pilot schools where they're requiring everyone to do an apprenticeship. And it's kind of easier in New York City where there's a lot of jobs and kids can take the metro, the subway. Um, but that's an experiment that everyone's watching because they're doing it at scale. So I mean, those are some of the things. I mean, there's a lot to be said about um, high school, but one of the things for counseling in high school that I profile and I'm very bullish on is this idea that counselors need to be supported in helping students see um, all the multiple pathways or multiple things they could do after high school rather than just call either you're on the college application route or we have nothing for you.
Hmm.
Which I interviewed several counselors who like they feel really bad about that because that is the situation. um, it's like you can go to trade school, you can go to community college, or you can be on the 4-year track, and those are kind of the options. And there are more options now, but we don't have support mechanisms for those options. So it does feel kind of like you're just kind of throwing them out and giving them a few suggestions. So I followed a new service that has stood up in the last year or so. It's called Willow Education, and they are actually trying to create like a website um, and a community and apps and profile quizzes and that kind of thing to help level the playing field of all the options in a particular community that a student might have and to help you see the ROI of doing this program or that program and what your chances are of succeeding in that program.
Hmm. Yeah, and you mentioned earlier that community college community colleges are seeing a bit of an enrollment uptick, at least compared to the larger sector. Some of that likely due to all of these high schoolers taking
Right,
classes,
that's
dual
true.
enrollment classes. But also, I would think because community colleges, maybe they have more of this flexibility to offer certificate
Yeah.
programs, these micro credentials that are more appealing for high schoolers today who want that sort of tangible, hands-on job training. Is that what you're seeing as well in the community
Yeah.
college sector?
Yeah, that short-term certificates is the
Yeah.
fastest growing area in colleges generally, but community colleges are what's
Yeah.
driving that most of the certificate programs are in community colleges. Yeah.
So as we begin to wrap up, I'd love to hear some of your predictions of, where do you think we're going over the next 5 to 10 years? How do you think, or do you think colleges will change and adapt to provide these multiple pathways to adulthood for young people?
Yeah, well, I would say the trend that I'm most excited about, which not to be self-serving, but the Education Design Lab is involved in this trend, which is why I know more about it. I mean, there may be other, maybe something's happening that I'm just not aware of, but would love to, hear more from folks who are listening. Um, but one of the trends I'm most excited about is this idea of micro pathways, the notion that a college can offer what you might call a stack of two or three micro credentials that you earn in a 4 week to 6 month program that are designed for a particular job role. Excuse me. And so the lab is working with 100 community colleges and now entire states
Hmm.
to organize these in a way that employers come in and they say, okay, we need, and we help them distill what are the 6 or 10 skills you need for this role, and then you build the program to that end. And the community colleges are organizing them. What we don't so there are about 100 we've created about 130, I think, of these micro pathways in all kinds of fields: tech, healthcare, advanced manufacturing, education, um, construction management is another one. And they stack to degree. So the idea is it gives you the visibility to see, oh, okay, I see how I get to, the RN nursing role or the cybersecurity, you know, associate's or bachelor's degree. You can see it because they stack it and show, and they're on the website. If you go to educationdesignlab dot or eddesignlab.org and look under micro pathways, you'll see, you can see examples of them. And so I'm excited about that because it shows the possibility of how you can, unbundle. We were all worried about, oh
Hmm.
no, higher ed's going to get unbundled, 10 years ago, but it can get unbundled on our terms, as people who support higher ed and support institutions. If we do the unbundling and repackaging ourselves and put offer degrees with that, I think that's, kind of what I'm most excited about. The hard part, which, somebody's probably going, but wait a minute, it's hard to fund those. And that is very true. We've got to work on the funding model for short-term credentials. There's, legislation, short-term Pell, in Congress right now, but it hasn't passed, which makes some of that possible, but not that easy in terms of, demonstrating efficacy. But I think the world is moving there. It's not to say, I say in the last chapter of the book that I still believe that, as many as a third of Americans will still get degrees. Um, those will be available to folks who want them, and the traditional college experience for those of us who are nostalgic about it, as I am, will still be there. But we can't try to force everyone to do the whole thing and then just kind of like sweep under the carpet the fact that it's not working, which has, I think, been the situation for the last 30 years.
Hmm. Well, such a great conversation, Kathleen. I know you mentioned the Education Design Lab. Again, that website is eddesignlab.org. Your book, again, is Who Needs College Anymore? Imagining a Future Where Degrees Won't Matter. That's available wherever books are sold. And Kathleen deLaski, thank you so much for your time and insights and for being on the Liberated podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Kerry. I really appreciate it.